Thanks so much for joining me today, and I really appreciate your time. Before, actually, I got to tell you, I'm a Navy SEAL and a trainer at heart, and this podcast kind of crept up on me, and now it's really grown in popularity, and I love doing it because I get to meet people like you. But I don't really participate in culture as much as I should, and I recall seeing a book come out years ago called The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari. And I was like, that looks really interesting because I've been a Zen practitioner since 21, and then I became a warrior. And so I've always fashioned myself like a warrior monk. And I was like, I've got to read that book. And then when I saw that Robin Sharma was coming on, I'm like, holy shit, he's the author of that book. And man, I've been in a cave because now he's kind of a big deal.
Well,
And like, you're
you're
a big deal. You've sold like 20 million books. That's incredible.
you,
So
you know
congratulations. That's awesome.
it's you're so generous to say that. I don't feel like I'm a big deal. I feel in many ways I'm a beginner,
Uh-huh.
and I think every one of us is a big deal. That's really the message I'm trying to share in the Everyday Hero Manifesto. I think
Right.
what we do is, Mark, we pedestal these people like the billionaires. We
Right.
pedestal the uh, the industry titans, the famous athletes, the film celebrities. But I really do believe that the baker who does his or her work like Picasso painted is a big deal. I think
Right.
the taxi driver whose taxi is incredibly clean and they do their work beautifully and they care about their customers is a big deal. I think the
Yeah.
startup entrepreneur who no one believes in them, but they have this bold vision to disrupt the marketplace and change the world is a big deal. I think every human being on the planet is a big deal. I think
Totally
it's
agree.
just the ego and the social constructs that measure people in these ways that make them look like a big deal.
Yeah. I love that. So you're saying, and I agree with this, that some of the most enlightened people are the unknowns, just going about their job and dropping little bits of goodness around them. That's awesome.
Absolutely, I think there are no extra people on the planet.
Yeah.
I think it's pure ego and judgment to say that the person who has fame, fortune, and applause is to be seen as more successful
Right.
than the person who is quietly digging ditches. Or I think all labor has real value. I think all life has real value. I think if you're living your life, I hadn't planned to start off like this, but
No.
you asked a great question or brought me to this place. And I think if someone is living a life that feels true to them and it brings joy to their heart and it honors their values, even if they're an army of one and no one knows them, I think they're almost enlightened in many ways.
Yeah. And I think, tell me if you agree with this, but one person who brings that level of positivity, love, and forgiveness into the world can counterbalance out hundreds or thousands or millions of negative people who are vibrating in a much lower level.
Well, you're absolutely right. Metaphysically, we are all
Metaphysically.
connected. I know you're suggesting that. I
Yeah.
I'm delighted that you're taking us into that place. But there's a great book. You've probably read it, and it's called Power versus Force
Oh,
by
it's
Dave.
one of my favorite. He's one of my heroes.
And even if you've probably read Letting Go, which is
Hmm.
which is another great book.
Of course.
But you're right. He talks about the people who are vibrating at a certain level, and because we are all one, and we're in this, we are all so connected that as we do our work, as we do our healing, as we do our meditation, as we do our prayer, as we do our journaling, as we lean into our limitations and our blocks
Yeah.
to our light, we have a dramatic impact on the entire world. I mean, Mother Teresa said it so well. She said, if we only if each of us would clean our own doorstep, the whole world would be clean.
Whole
And I
world
think
would
in
be
this
clean.
world that we're living in, it's so easy to wish the economy would be better, to wish the plague would be over, to wish that business was easier, to wish that you know our kids were nicer, or whatever it is that we give away our power to. But when we look in the mirror and we ask ourselves, what do I need to do to become the person I need to be to hold the life I want? That's when the real revolutions begin.
Oh, I'm 100%. That is so well said. Yeah, be the change you want to see in the world at scale. And that's why, let me bring it back to like you are a big deal because if you can impact 5 or 600 million people and move them in the direction where there are 500 million people a year are cleaning their doorstep, right? Or 500 million people a year are waking up every morning in gratitude and taking charge of their day, because I know that that's a big message of yours too, in a positive way. That at scale changes everything. And it's the first time in human history that we are aware of where we can have that kind of optimistic outlook that, wow, there's a lot of change happening at the level of consciousness because of the way technology has connected us all and given, you a platform and me a platform to be able to help change the dialogue and the habits. Extraordinary. So here's the question on that. You don't have to respond to that right now, but how do you maintain humility, in the spite of all of the, like people like me saying, wow, you're a big deal?
It's a brilliant question. The first thing I'd say, Mark, is I'm my father's son. My father's father, my grandfather, was a priest. My father is the most humble person I know.
Mm-hmm.
And he raised my brother and I with sayings like this: Robin, when you were born, you cried while the world rejoiced. Live your life in such a way that when you die, the world cries while you rejoice.
Wow.
My dad was a Rotarian, the founder of Rotary. The one
Really?
my dad was a Rotarian, and
Cool.
and I believe Paul Harris, the founder of Rotary, said, "The one who serves the best profits the most." And so this was
Yeah.
the psychology and emotionality and spirituality that has been hardwired into me. There's
Mm-hmm.
a chapter in the Everyday Hero Manifesto about that time I met Muhammad Ali, and it talks about the traits of the true titans. And one of the things I noted about him was his incredible grace and humility. And
Mm-hmm.
so how do I do it in terms? So first of all, it's a philosophy that I've been brought up with. Secondly, I just resonate with the leaders that had humility. My life changed a number of years ago when I stood in Nelson Mandela's prison cell,
No kidding.
and I talked to the guide, and I said, did you ever meet Nelson Mandela? He said, well, I was a former ANC prisoner myself. I served with him for, I believe it was 8 years. I said, well, what was he like? And he said, well, that man was a humble servant. I've never forgotten that, a humble servant. So the heroes that I admire are people who are very forceful. They are warriors, but they're warrior servants. I'll
Right.
just make
Love
up
that.
that word, that term, but they're warrior servants,
Right.
and that just speaks to me. In terms of tactics, Mark, I pray a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I find prayer. I pray for humility.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I meditate a lot, so that hopefully keeps me very grounded. I journal every day for about an hour, which is very powerful to me.
Mm-hmm.
I love reading books of wisdom, and all the great books of wisdom talk about the importance of humility. And there's a chapter at the end of the Everyday Hero Manifesto called The Titan's Decline. And
Mm-hmm.
I think, I've worked with a lot of big companies and a lot of superstars. And I think nothing fails like success. I think when you are most successful, you are most vulnerable. I think one of the
100%.
greatest snares is when people think you're a big deal, say you're a big deal, actually drinking the Kool-Aid.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's almost like you're a warrior. It's like a war. As you become more and more successful and people are celebrating you and they're saying things to you, I think it's very seductive to start believing in what people are saying. And then the next step is you lose the fire in the belly and you lose the hunger to get better and to serve more people. And then the
Mm-hmm.
next step of it is you stop doing the very things that got you to where you are. There's
Mm-hmm.
this term called hubris, and
Yeah.
hubris is so dangerous. It makes me think of there was a military commander in Rome called the Dux,
Mm-hmm.
and he had a slave who had one job. The slave would stand behind him and whisper into his ear, memento homo, memento homo, memento homo, which is Latin for remember you're only a man.
Human. Yeah.
You're only human. And
Yeah.
so humility to me is like it's not talked about a lot, but it's such a key to building a great company, a great life. It's so key to calibrating your craft to world class, because The great thing about a master is she always thinks like a beginner.
Hmm. Yeah, empty your cup every day. I think that's one of the best descriptions or dialogues about humility that I've heard in a long time. And I agree, especially all leaders, would really benefit from this. Because you're right, it's once you're in the pinnacle, there's only one way to go for most people if you start believing your own bullshit, and it's down. But if you're there in service, then you're at the bottom of the mountain all the time. Just there's nowhere to go but service. It's not a linear thing anymore, right?
Service, you don't hear about service and humility and generosity as a means to build a great life often, or
Right.
a great business. But
Right.
this morning, in preparation to meet you, Mark, I listened to an interview after Steve Jobs passed away, and they were interviewing people who knew him very well. And some of the people who knew him well said, definitely he could be very angry, but he did it because he was so passionate.
Yeah.
And he did it because he so believed in creating beautiful products that would make people's lives better. And so service isn't talked about as a way to build a company or be an elite performer that often. It
Hmm.
is more these days than before. But when you fall in love with serving the world through the work that you do and the life that you live, then people feel the love in your products. People feel
Hmm.
the love in your work.
Hmm.
And you get knocked down, but you don't have a choice. You just keep on getting back up. So coming from a place of serving people is actually an incredible formula for elite performance and exponential productivity.
Yeah. Some, and I would maintain probably few, are born with that level of, or that level, yeah, level of development or awareness or consciousness, right? Mother Teresa, you mentioned earlier, for instance, or a Gandhi, or a few of those notables, Steve Jobs, but most aren't. And so it takes practice. And so you mentioned a few different practices that you had that helped you kind of evolve to where you're totally grounded in service, prayer, meditation, journaling. Can you talk a little bit about those practices and what they do for you? Because they're different, right? And you do a combination of practices just as like I do and I recommend, more of an integration of, the mental and the spiritual. And so prayer does something unique. Meditation does another thing that's unique for you. Journaling does a yet another thing. And they all work together, right? To evolve us. Can you talk about your perspective on that? Because I'm really fascinated about that.
Absolutely. The first, in terms of a little context, so many people in the personal mastery field talk about mindset.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, mindset is important. You know that better than most people. The
Yeah.
importance of a calibrated psychology
Right.
that allows you to stay in flow state and be acutely focused when you're in harm's way or even when you're not.
Right.
Your daily behavior, of course, it reflects your deepest beliefs. Anyone who wants to ascend so they're more happy and productive and joyful needs to work on their psychology, obviously. But I believe that there are actually four elements to the personal mastery equation. Mindset is only 25% of it.
Okay.
After mindset, there's this term that I teach called heart set, because we
Mm-hmm.
have an emotional life. And if
Mm-hmm.
you are full of
Love it.
shit, right? So you have a great mindset, you've calibrated, you've read all the books, you've done all the meditation, you've done the journaling, you have your 70-year plan like Serena Williams's father did before they were born. Great, but you're still sabotaging yourself if you have a heart set full of repressed emotions, which Carl Jung called the shadow side. That's why
Right.
so many people read the books, they go to the courses, they get the insights, they get the mentoring, and they're still stuck. They're stuck
Yes.
in limbic hijack because intellectually they know what to do, but emotionally they haven't done the interior work designed to clear out, let's call it the emotional baggage.
Yep.
So there's heart set, but that's only the second emotional interior empire. There's also, in my methodology, health set, which
Mm-hmm.
is your physicality, which is,
Right.
we can talk about that, like epigenetics and biohacking and
Mm-hmm.
exercise and all. And then there's soul set,
Mm-hmm. I
which
love
is
it.
your spirituality. And that really gets back to service. When you find a cause that's larger than yourself, you become, as you would say, unbeatable. You become bulletproofed and battleproofed Because
Right.
literally, Martin Luther King Jr., he said it far more elegantly than I ever could. He said, when you have discovered something you are willing to die for, unless you've discovered something you're willing to die for, you're not fit to live. And
Mm,
all the great heroes found that cause that they were sometimes literally willing to take a bullet for. And that's what allowed them to be great. Okay, so there's the four interior empires. In terms of tactics, in terms of mindset, meditation has been so helpful to me. I especially love guided meditations. Prayer is, as I mentioned, something I do every day. If you're not religious, then call it scientific prayer, but just
right.
speaking to your higher power. It might not be God, but we all have an egoic self and a heroic self.
Hmm.
Speaking to your higher power, praying to
Hmm.
your wisdom, praying to your best, praying to your unbeatable self.
Hmm.
So prayer is incredibly powerful. Journaling has saved my life and transformed my life.
Mm. And how
W-
so? Yeah.
When I've been on my knees and suffering, I've poured my pain out onto a blank page,
Hmm.
which allowed me to process through it. I mean, pain is, I think, life's greatest purifier.
Indeed. Hmm.
So I've written about my pain. If I've been confused in my life, I've written to pages and pages until I got to clarity. In my journaling, I write things I'm grateful for. If I go to a great restaurant, I'll get the business card and I'll use my little glue stick on the plane or in the hotel room and I'll glue the card in and I'll relive and deepen the experience within my mind and my heart and my spirit by writing about the food and the conversation and the room. And so I write about gratitude. I write about lessons I've learned. I write about my 5-year plan. I write about who, in the morning, sometimes I write about the man I want to be in the day. Habit
Hmm.
researchers call it a pre commitment strategy. So many people say, how do you be more disciplined so you actually live your vision? You write it. When you write
Hmm.
things down, you actually deepen commitment into it. So
Hmm.
if I get new ideas for books, I write them down. I do so much in my journals.
That's awesome. There's something that's coming to me, which I've never asked anyone, and I've also thought about it in the context of myself. And so many people are driven. Um, of course, you would say that they're all mindset. So they're driven by their mind and kind of the ego to succeed. So and they're doing a lot of great work: peak performance, flow state, exercise, nutrition, dialing sleep. But their day is still, and their feeling state, their body, their feeling, their experience is still one of like striving, not quite there. And I'm saying this from personal experience, like looking for something ephemeral that's missing. And as I've surrendered, you mentioned David Hawkins letting go. As I surrendered and I've worked on my gratitude and positivity and humility and all those things that you were just talking about, the striving started to slip away. And what replaced it for me was a much lighter feeling, like this ephemeral quality, like I'm just kind of like dancing lightly through the day. And I don't feel that heaviness and the anxiety and the neediness to like do one more thing or accomplish one more thing. I would love to hear what your experience is like. Like, how are you different from when you wrote, The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari to when you wrote the Everyday Hero Manifesto in 2020, 21?
Uh, Brilliant question. When I wrote The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari, I was very much like the person you're describing. And I've been working on myself intensely for going on 22 years. When I wrote The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari, I was a litigation lawyer. I was very successful in the world, but very empty within. And what is the point of climbing the mountaintop according to the metrics that the world sells you as measures of success when you can't even feel a sunset, when you can't even feel gratitude, the very things you're suggesting? So I was living in my head, Mark. So the Everyday Hero Manifesto, it's about productivity, it's about spirituality, it's about living a beautiful life, it's about doing amazing work. But one of the themes in the book is there's a chapter, for example, called The Big Lie of Positive Thinking. The world has sold us a bill of goods that if we, let's say if our heart is broken, but if we focus on the positive parts of it, we're going to be okay.
Mm-hmm.
What that does is it represses the trauma, and it stuffs it within us.
Mm-hmm.
And because we don't want to feel the pain or the shame or the disappointment or the anger, all those normal emotions that we collect as we journey through life, we stuff it all within us and we think it's not there. Now, I
Okay.
think you're identifying something that I think is one of the most important elements to personal transformation and elite performance. In
Mm-hmm.
elite performance, everyone talks about getting up early, productivity ideas, your pre-sleep ritual, etc. But none of those will work if you are carrying a field of hurt and toxic emotions that you have stuffed deep within you.
Yeah.
So back to your question, as we pick up the micro and macro trauma of life, and if we don't learn how to process through it, we start to live in our heads.
Mm-hmm.
And so we become these striving machines because we can no longer feel.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, many of the world's most elite performers, they have all their checklists, they have all their routines, they're striving, they are machine. They're Navy SEALs, so to speak,
Mm-hmm.
in their domain.
Yep.
Having said that, some of that, or often a lot of that, is driven by fear and anger and not enoughness and unhealthy emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And so as I've done my healing as well, it's very much been to get back into the body and to learn how to feel again. Because what's the point of, let's say, making a fortune if you can't feel the beauty of nature, if you can't read a book and allow it to touch you, if you can't, even in a love relationship, if you can't really, if you have no intimacy with your emotions. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think I've become less a striving person and much more like you. And part of it is also allowing myself to be in seasons where I'm not a machine, where I'm not running every protocol, where I'm
Mm-hmm.
not I wrote the 5 a.m. club, but there are seasons where I might need a little bit more rest. John Lennon said it so well. He said, time you enjoy wasting is not wasted time. And I think life ultimately is this balance. It's when you're living in your head, everything is so linear. It's like mathematical. But when you actually develop intimacy with your truest self, then you trust the muse much more. And I think your work reflects the magic. You live in the magic, and
Mm.
life is much more soulful and beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. What a couple of really interesting things came to me. One, for me, I had a fairly traumatic childhood because my father. I mean, it was both perfect on one side, always taken care of, and my family was, you know, outwardly successful, family business, all that, summer home. But a lot of 7 generations of alcoholism and abuse going on, and so it took me till like my early 30s to like wake up and look at that and say, oh, wow, I've got some patterns to deal with here. I've got some suppressed trauma. And so I went to town in that like a Navy SEAL did. But when I talk about it, I see a lot of people kind of come back and they say, well, I didn't have that experience. So ergo, I must not have trauma. And so I'm looking at you and say, wow, you just described a beautiful father and beautiful mother, you know, from India, born in Uganda, I think, right? But then to Canada, there wasn't, it doesn't seem like you had alcoholism and abuse and like that type of trauma, but still you're talking about repressed trauma having to be overcome. I think that's an incredible message for peak performers because like I don't think you can, my personal position, and I'd like to hear yours on this, is I don't think you can avoid that. Our culture itself is traumatic. Even our, you could even say the biases that come from language, or even some of the conversation right now about race relations, everything. There's trauma that's baked into our human experience, whether you grow up with a father like mine or not.
Mark, look at the world right now.
Yeah.
If you didn't feel and suffer from the collective trauma of what the world is going through, you wouldn't be human.
Hmm.
So there's one of the early chapters in the Everyday Hero Manifesto where I talk about an experience I had in Thailand. And there was many thousands of years ago, there was a golden Buddha. And
Hmm.
this golden Buddha was revered by the people of the country, priceless national treasure. And then it became clear that invaders were going to come into the area and they could lose this golden Buddha. So the inhabitants came up with this idea. They hatched a plan and they would put layer and layer and layer of mud and soil over the good golden Buddha to hide it. And sure enough, the invaders came in and they didn't see it. A few hundred years later, people were walking by and they noticed a little bit of gold shining out from this mountain of mud, and they started digging through layer and layer, and as they moved through layer and layer they saw more and more gold, and as they dug even more deeply they saw more of this priceless treasure, and then eventually they removed all of the mud and it was just pure magic. It was this mountain of gold.
That's
And
a
I think
metaphor
that's
for the human spirit, right?
it's a metaphor, and so I went and saw the golden Buddha when I
Oh,
was
cool.
doing a presentation, and the pictures in that chapter. But it's I cannot think of a better metaphor. First of all, many of the people who think they have no trauma have been deeply traumatized and they're not conscious to their trauma. I mean, how many
Mhm.
people have been deeply traumatized and they say, my childhood was perfect?
I was one of them for
So,
sure. Yeah.
so that's the first thing. Secondly, you're absolutely right. We suffer from, as human beings, we're born into perfection and then we start to live life. And every single one of us experiences either macro trauma or what I call in the book micro trauma.
Mhm.
Macro trauma could be physical abuse, loss of a parent, car accident, or when we get older, bankruptcy, a violent attack, etc. But the very nature of being human is also micro trauma. You're 3 years old or 5 years old, and you say, I want to be an astronaut. I want to be a Navy SEAL when I grow up. And your teacher says, you're too dumb to do that. You're not good
Mhm.
enough to do that. You're not smart enough to do that. You're at
Mhm.
home singing, and you say, I want to be an opera singer like Pavarotti. And someone says to you, you could never do that. Be reasonable. You're 15. You ask someone out and they say no and they put you down. And so we pick up this micro and macro trauma. And these are the layers that we all accumulate over the golden Buddha. And so by doing the work using the tools I describe in the book, one of them is called the AFRA tool, which has been incredibly powerful to my high level clients in transforming themselves. So they clear away those layers. But here's what starts to happen. You see, a lot of people, they have a story. They
Mhm.
say that Muhammad Ali, and they say that Kanye, they say that Shakespeare, they say that Hedy Lamarr, Elon Musk, Oprah Winfrey, Beethoven, Michelangelo are cut from a different cloth. But that just isn't true. It's
Mhm.
just that so many people have these layers over their primal genius that they've forgotten who they truly are.
Mhm.
And so
Yeah.
they have a story that the geniuses and the elite performers are different from them, but that just isn't true. They have a story that they have to resign themselves to average. And then they don't know the techniques and the tools and the daily rituals that, if practiced with consistency, would allow them to reclaim the people that they truly are.
Yeah. Wow. I was thinking about, speaking of trauma, think about social media and the perfectionism, right, that's expressed there. That's traumatizing for our kids to see that I'll never be like that. I mean, look at Kim Kardashian or whoever. Crazy. Now, you just led me to where I wanted to go. So thank you very much. How do, this is, I'm going to frame this up, but the question that everyone's thinking right now is, okay, that sounds great, but what do I do? And there are two very, very different viewpoints. One of my favorite psychology authors is a guy named Bruce Tift, who wrote a book called Already Free. And he was a Western psychologist who became a Buddhist, and he gave up Western psychology. And then once he kind of mastered the Eastern psychological methods of Buddhism and meditation, he kind of came back to Western psychology and said, wait a minute, these actually can work together like a hand in the glove. And the Western approach is to like, something's broken, so fix it. The Eastern approach is the Buddha. Everything's okay, just remove the layers of crud that are keeping you from your awesomeness. Um, do you believe, or what would you prescribe to someone who comes to you, or what do you prescribe to a client who comes to you who's either in denial or has never done any emotional work? Like so many men, especially high performance men, they just think it is weakness. But if we can kind of show them, hey, wait, you're already free, but there's some tools you can use to chip away from the Western, but then maybe the meditation practice can help you understand that everything's all right just the way it is too.
Yeah, I think first of all, I do get asked that question a lot. What do you do? Like, so what do you do? And I appreciate the question. I'm happy to walk through some of the tactics.
Yeah.
Having said that, methodology without philosophy is a very empty sport.
I love
And
that.
we are in such a mathematical, scientific world where it's always like, what do I do? What are the
Yeah,
tactics?
step one, step two, step
One
three.
step, give me the formula. And the Everyday Hero Manifesto has hundreds of specific tools, not only for emotional healing, for elite performance, for creativity, living a world class life. There's the models like the 8 forms of wealth, the pyramid of um, peak productivity. But what I'm trying to suggest is may we not discount the value of philosophy?
Hmm.
Because philosophy is which mountain do we climb?
Right.
Methodology is how do we get, once we know the mountain, how do we scale to the summit? Philosophy plus methodology gets you to world class. And
Hmm.
so philosophy is, what are the truths? What are the beliefs I'm going to live by? What does wisdom say a great life looks like, heroism looks like? Versus so many people, it's like, so what do we do? That even suggests, and I think you were suggesting it, like the Western philosophy, it's like, what do I do?
Right.
Maybe we don't have to do. I mean, a lot of what I talk about in the book is like, I don't believe in hustle and grind. If you look
Hmm.
at the science, the most effective performers are not hustle and grinders. They
Hmm.
marry elite performance with deep recovery. Rest is
Hmm.
not a luxury, it's a necessity. You look
Hmm.
at the best artists in the world. They had periods in the sunshine of exponential creativity, working their craft, and then they had the wisdom to allow themselves to do nothing,
Right.
to let the ideas incubate, to, it's almost like a fallow season of the farmer where it looks like nothing is happening, but that's actually when the next harvest is coming. And to your point about living in the head, if you live in the head, you're going to be every second, I need to run this thing. I need to have a checklist of every little thing here. I'll feel guilty if I'm not working, but that is actually not productive. So
Right.
you also mentioned about men, let's say, and people saying, the societal belief, which is, oh, healing and inner work is weak. Healing and inner work, anyone who's doing it is for the brave-hearted.
No kidding.
And I would actually say, if I was mentoring someone, why should I do the work you're talking about? Well, first of all, what's the point of making all the money in the world and being super famous and successful and having no joy and peace in your heart? And
Hmm.
the second thing is, if you want to be more productive, this is the gateway into it. So what would be some tools or methods? I mean, there's so many, but a great morning routine, we could talk about it, but I call it the 20-20-20 formula. I talk in the book about the 5 great hours rule. You only need to work 5 hours a day.
Hmm.
Most people work 2 or 3 weeks to get 5 world-class hours
Yeah.
in.
I
So
love it.
learning how to do the 5 great hours rule is very powerful. The 60-minute student, I believe education is inoculation against disruption. You're right. You look in the world right now, we are addicted to our white devices and people dancing according, in little TikTok videos. But the real heavyweights, not only the industry titans, but the spiritual heavyweights, these people have a deep, holy curiosity and they love to learn. So 60
Mm.
minutes a day working on your craft,
Mhm.
studying in a world gone superficial, going really deep. So you have deep industry knowledge and deep personal knowledge on a few things.
Mhm.
Strong pre-sleep ritual is very powerful. Chanting and meditation, prayer, journaling, visualization, as the Japanese say, forest bathing. I could go on and on and on. Exercise, I mean, creates a pharmacy of mastery, releases norepinephrine, which increases focus, dopamine, the inspirational neurotransmitter, serotonin, which is the feel good chemical, reduces your cortisol, increases your metabolic rate. So many tactics that allow you to, even just active recovery, taking the time to enjoy life, very powerful.
So I've probably talked too much about my ritual to my um, audience here, but they know that I don't do anything before 10 o'clock in the morning because from 5 or 6 to 10 is my practice time and my training time and everything like that. And so it's just been a game changer for me. But what does your daily ritual look like? And does it change every day, or do you have a set routine?
I live my life according to seasons.
I like that.
So I have my high excellence cycle and my deep recovery cycle.
Hmm.
In a certain week, I might have my high excellence cycle days. I might be up at 4:15, have my morning workout, what I call my second wind workout at the end of my workday, etc. And then I
Hmm.
have days in the week where I might do nothing, where I might sunbathe, where I might cook for my family. Often that's Fridays. Once a week, I have a zero device day.
Nice.
So no day looks the same. But Mark, I also live. There might be 3 or 4 months if I'm working on a new book or working on an online course or something like that. I'll be very intense, very calibrated, very structured,
Hmm.
very scheduled. But then often, because creativity is a resource that needs to be renewed, just like willpower. So after I might have 3 or 4 months of like elite performance, I will allow myself the time to refill the well of inspiration as well as energy and soulfulness. And those will be times where I might not be running the routines that I usually run. And I'll give myself permission to enjoy the fruits of my labor and also just enjoy life. And as you were suggesting, it's the inner work that has allowed me the confidence and the faithfulness in my instinct that allows me to live in that non-linear way.
Hmm.
That's literally trusting. I think the instinct is more powerful than the intellect. And when you
Hmm.
actually trust the seasons of your life, I think you do much more real work in the seasons of high productivity, and you actually enjoy life and you live in the flow in those times when you're not as productive.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I agree with that. We've got to be winding down here because we've been going for about 40 minutes or so. But what's your vision for the future of humanity? I mean, we're in this exponential age with AI and the metaverse and everything coming on. Where it seems like humans are going more and more in the opposite direction from what we're talking about. What's your vision for the future?
I think I think the light attracts angels as well as moths. And I think there's a lot, obviously, we're in a very challenging time with the plague and climate change and social division and
Hmm.
economic upheaval. And
Hmm.
I think that change is going to accelerate. And having said that, I've never seen so many people waking up to the kinds of conversations that we're having. I've never seen so many people interested in personal development. I've never seen
Hmm.
so many people with an appetite to be selfless versus selfish. I've never seen so many people who care about the environment and humanity. So I'm very, very, very bullish on the future. I think that deep change leads to deep transformation. We're in one of those epochs, one of those eras
Hmm.
where everything looks like it's falling apart, but we must experience a crucifixion in order to experience a resurrection.
Hmm.
As a human being, we must let go of everything that we have known in order to experience something better. And so Richard Bach said it well. He said, what the caterpillar sees as the end of the world, the master sees as the butterfly. And I think we're being led to a very beautiful place, kicking and screaming.
Kicking and screaming, yeah, and also, with maybe a little bit of just ignorance, but that's okay because it's going to happen anyways. I agree with you 100%. The old institutions, it's like winter time into spring. The old institutions have to break down, but they're pretty resistant to change, and so there's going to be a lot of chaos and probably destruction. But on the other side of that is beauty. It's a whole new era, I think.
Well,
That's
we
awesome.
have to suffering gets a bad rap. A bad day
Mhm.
for the ego is a great day for the soul. And so suffering, it's if you look at the Nelson Mandelas, the Mother Teresa's, the Mahatma Gandhis, the Rosa Parks, the Martin Luther King Juniors, these people out-suffered everyone around them. But it was the it was the suffering that cracked the case over their wisdom and true bravery. I don't think those people actually were natural born. I talked to someone who knew Nelson Mandela very well, and they said, Robin, Nelson Mandela became Nelson Mandela in prison.
Right.
And so we are all suffering in one form or another. We have a choice. The victim sees suffering and runs away from it. The hero sees suffering and uses it to transfigure and transform them.
Right.
By I mean, how do we learn the great virtues? How do we learn? Helen Keller said it great well. She said, we would not learn to be brave and patient if there was only joy in the world. And so we
Mhm.
have a choice right now as human beings when we walk out in this world. We can use whatever we're dealing with to make us stronger, wiser, better, more creative, more loving, or we can use it to make us harder and more separate. That's a choice we all have.
Mm. Amazing. I love it. People can literally just Google you, I'm sure, but where would you like to direct them in terms of your current work? And is it this book or is it your social media channels?
Yeah, I've poured my heart and soul in this book, The Everyday Hero
Yeah.
Manifesto. I wrote it 16 months over the pandemic. I've
Right.
shared so much of the methodology. I've shared with the
Hmm.
billionaires I've mentored, the NBA players, the titans
Hmm.
of industry, and movement makers.
Hmm.
There's so much in it. People will get a lot out of it. Like I say, it's called The Everyday Hero Manifesto, available in bookstores around the world.
Hmm.
Audible, people are loving the audiobook, and on Amazon.
Do you
And
read the audiobook?
I didn't, and
Yeah.
I'll, if you're interested, I can share why.
Sure. Yeah, I'm curious about that because I have had people like it when they listen to my voice in my books, and I've done others where I didn't read it, and I've gotten some criticism. So I'm curious about that.
Yeah, I hear you, and I hear the same thing. Like we want you to read it. I've done some of my books, audiobooks in the past. I had an excellent reader read this one, and the reason for that is I'm not a professional audiobook reader.
That's right.
And
Exactly.
so what
It's
I
hard
try to
work.
do,
Yeah.
it's hard work, and I don't mind the hard work, but it's in my life I always try to surround myself with people who are world class in certain areas. And so I just I'm not an audiobook reader. I wanted someone who doesn't sound fake, who sounded really real and had the vibe I was looking for, but just is a master of reading an audiobook. And then the second place I'd encourage people, if they've resonated with what I've shared, robinsharma.com. They can subscribe to my email list where I send out a really strong material on a weekly basis, like videos and
Hmm.
posts and that kind of thing. And I'm on social media, YouTube and Instagram. I like Instagram.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm going to go sign up for your email when I'm done here
Hope you
so
love
we
it.
can stay connected. Robin, it's been a real honor to have this conversation. I really appreciate you and I love your message. And I know you're going to just keep charging ahead from the bottom of the mountain in service and in humility. So I appreciate that. And thank you very much for your time today.
Been an absolute pleasure. I wish you continued success. I know how successful your podcast has become, and I want to also appreciate you for the depth of your questions and where you took us. Like
Yeah.
really amazing. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.